Palestinian Mandate, from its beginning, was a struggle between the Jewish community and the Arab community over land and population. The Zionists understood that if they were going to turn the promise of a national home into an independent state, they had to get Jews to come in from around the world to Palestine. And then they also had to get as much land as they could. Population was the first major battleground, the demographics of Palestine. If we go back to the 1850s, before the rise of Jewish nationalism in Europe, there were about 5% Jews living in what is today Palestine. The rest were Muslim Palestinians, and about 10% were Christian Palestinians. The struggle for land began with the rise of Zionism and the attempt to encourage Jews to move to Palestine. By World War I, 1914, about 14% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. With the Balfour Declaration, issued in 1917, and the declaration by the British of a Jewish national home in Palestine, immigration began in earnest. The problem was convincing European Jews to come to Palestine. Most didn't want to. It was a land filled with malaria, with Arabs, and a hostile climate. Most European Jews wanted to come to the United States or the Americas. In many ways, New York was the Jerusalem of European Jewry. Between 1880 and the First World War, about 2 million Jews left Europe for the United States. That began to change with a bunch of laws passed in the United States in the 1920s that limited migration. Jews began to look for a way to go to Palestine, to get out of Europe, and many chose going to Palestine. This particularly happened with the rise of Hitler. Without the rise of Hitler in Europe and Nazism and growing anti-Semitism, which culminated in the Holocaust, it's very possible that Jews would have remained there and not been attracted to the Zionist dream. We can see in the growth of Jewish immigration to Palestine the effects of the rise of Hitler in Europe. Immigration begins to really take off in 1933 when Hitler comes to power in Europe. The Jewish population of Palestine, which is at about 113,000 in 1931, jumps up to 650,000 by 1948. And that's largely due to the rise of Hitler. As Palestinian Arabs began to experience this rapid growth of Jewish migration, they began to complain bitterly. Riots broke out, the first in 1919, but others punctuated the Mandate years. The Palestinian Revolt of 1936 to 1939 was the most important uprising. It forced over 100,000 British soldiers to come to Palestine in order to suppress it. It also devastated Palestinian leadership. But it was a response to this heavy Jewish immigration into Palestine caused by the rise of Hitler. The British understood that they were facing a terrible dilemma. They had promised Jews a national home in Palestine, but they had also promised the Palestinians that they wouldn't prejudice their rights in Palestine too. In a sense, Britain had promised two different peoples, Palestine, the Jews and the Palestinians. The demographic battle for Palestine was only one of the major playing fields for competition. The other was the acquisition of land. Because, after all, possession is 9/10 of the law. And whoever was going to own the land, in the end, would be more likely to get a nation. The Jewish National Fund was established by the World Zionist Organization in order to acquire land. And wealthy Jews of Europe donated money, which went to purchase Arab land in Palestine. By 1947, about 7% of all the land of Palestine had been purchased by Jews. The government owned much of Israel as well. They had inherited that land from the Ottomans when they took over Palestine. But most of the land was owned by Palestinians. This created a situation in 1947 when the UN acquired the mandate of Palestine and had to come up with a solution for the problem of these two nations that were, in a sense, or two peoples that were vying for a nation of Palestine. And we arrive at that point where 7% of the land is owned by the Yishuv, the Jewish community, and about 1/3 of the population is Jewish. The UN decided to give about 54% of the land of Palestine to the Jewish community. This created outrage amongst the Palestinians. No Palestinian leader was able to accept this deal. If they had, it's very possible their people would have turned against them. After all, from a Palestinian point of view, this deal looked terribly one-sided. 54% of the land going to people who owned only 7% of it. And again, the majority of land going to 1/3 of the population. In fact, if one goes around the different provinces of Palestine, the different cities, there was no major province or no major city in which there were a majority Jews, except for Tel Aviv, a new city created by the Yishuv. In most Palestinian cities, there was an Arab majority. This presented the UN with a dilemma. How do you partition Palestine to create a state for both Palestinians and Jews that would create a Jewish state that would actually have a majority of Jewish people? This meant that the map that the UN ultimately came up with was rather bizarre. It included 3 different parts of territory that were glued together by small little transit areas. Most of the Sinai Desert, which only had Palestinian Bedouin in it, was given to the Jewish community in order to keep the land more closer to 50-50. But this partition plan also meant that war was sure to break out. The borders were not realistic. The people were aggrieved. And it was a recipe for ongoing conflict.